The night I died, my husband checked his watch. Hold on to that. We buried my father that morning, Richard Sinclair, a kind, tired man who trusted the wrong smile, a family talent as it turned out. I walked the drive in the rain that night because the house was full of his absence and I couldn't breathe in it. In my first life, I mistook patience for love. I was about to learn what my patience had actually purchased. I came in through the garden door. The library doors stood open an inch, green lamplight, and two voices that had no business being comfortable in my father's room, my husband's and my sister's.
Nobody pulls calendars for a grieving family. The will reads, Ava gets the house and the sentiment. We get the shares.
He suspected, at the end. The last month, he wouldn't drink anything I poured.
Old men with weak hearts die of weak hearts. 8 months of patience, and the certificate says exactly what we need.
The will was forged. The marriage was a plan. And my father had been poisoned by the hand I kissed at the altar. Then my sister asked the only question left. What about Ava?
Ava signs whatever I put in front of her. She always has. It's her best quality.
6 years of my devotion, appraised and filed in 9 words. A wet floorboard betrayed me, and when Julian called my name through the door, warm again, instantly, it was the speed of the switch that made me run. You don't get that good without rehearsal. I ran to the greenhouse, my mother's orchid house, the one place that had never hurt me. It was the last mistake of my first life. I heard the door click shut behind me, then the key.
You were supposed to sleep through tonight. You always sleep when it matters.
I never saw which of them tipped the lamp. I only heard glass break, and then light stood up out of the dark and began eating my mother's orchids. I beat on that door until my fists left blood on the glass. And through the smear I saw him, my husband, on the lawn, under an umbrella my sister held. He wasn't running. He drew back his cuff and checked his watch, the way a man times a train. Then they walked back to the house, and the rain closed over them. The smoke took my legs first, and through the darkening glass I saw one last impossible thing. A second figure, coatless, sprinting toward the fire, toward me, hammering at the far door, shouting a word that might have been my name. Too late, all of it, too late. My last thought wasn't of Julian, or even of my father. The orchids were the only things in that house that never lied to me. Somewhere, a clock stood at 4:12 in the morning. I woke the way the drowning surface, sunlight, my girlhood bedroom, my hands, unburned. The palms I cut open on the greenhouse door were smooth as a girl's, and at my throat, my mother's locket, whole, unmelted, warm. The lawn below was dressed for a celebration, white marquees, a banner going up between the elms, my name and his, and on the terrace, berating a florist with visible relish, sat my grandmother, who had been dead for 3 winters. I read the newspaper's date 4 times, 5 years early, 3 days before the engagement party, before the prenup, the page that took 6 years to become a death warrant. In the mirror, a woman of 23 stared back at me, older than the house on the inside. All right, I told her, and my voice came out level, which surprised us both. Belief is a luxury. I needed proof, so I went down to breakfast like an actress returning to a play she'd closed years ago and nearly broke in the doorway because my father was alive, complaining about the Harrington contract word for word as I remembered. Celeste swept in late in the yellow dress, apologizing about the seamstress. Then Papa's cuff clipped the salt cellar and he said his line about my mother.
Your mother would have made me throw it over my shoulder.
Over your left shoulder. He laughed, delighted. She remembers everything, this one. Papa, you have no idea. Across the table, my sister buttered her toast, and I watched her the way you watch a knife in a drawer. Seen truly for the first time. The clock had been turned back and set ticking in my open hand. That afternoon I stood outside the greenhouse, orchids nodding as if nothing had ever happened, and waited for the rage. When it finally came, it didn't burn. It settled, cold and clean and heavy, like a keel going into a hull. My hands stopped shaking, and they didn't start again for years. I considered telling my father the truth for 11 seconds. Tell him what? That his golden boy would poison him with a ring he didn't own yet, for crimes he hadn't committed yet? Truth without evidence is just a scene, and scenes get women sedated, pitied, and quietly removed from boards. No, I would not scream the truth. I would rewrite the board. That night I began the ledger. Every date I could carry back from 5 years of the future. The audit rumor, grand staircase, the fire, the shell companies, the nurse who would lie, page after page, the future pinned down like specimens. At the top of the first page I wrote, they needed 6 years to take everything from me. I intended to be considerably faster. 3 days later, the estate wore every jewel it owned. A cake with my name on it, a future with my name on it, drafted entirely by other people. I wore the cream dress from my first life, deliberately. That night I needed to be invisible inside my old self. And I watched my fiancé work the crowd and made myself study it as craft. I had thought him charming. In fact, he was professional. I had married a performance and called it a man. My sister found me at the rose arbor and told me I looked like Mother's portrait, the exact words she'd used the first time, and her hand rose and tightened her pearl choker, just a fraction. She did that when she lied. It had taken me 1 death to notice.
People ask me what I love about Ava. I tell them she trusts. In a city like this one, she still trusts. It's the rarest thing I've ever seen. To Ava, may I spend my life proving her right?
I applauded with the rest of them, thinking, you rehearsed that in a mirror. I know the mirror. I've seen the apartment. Then the prenup was laid open under the lights like an altar, and a fountain pen was offered to me on an open palm. I took it. I walked through the applause. I bent over the page and read the line above the signature, the line I never read the first time. Then I set the pen down, crosswise, closed. No. Thank you all for coming. There will be no engagement. I watched the 3 faces that mattered, in order. My father, honest thunder. Celeste, the loving sister mask slipped 1 millimeter, and something old and cold looked out and recalculated. And Julian. Julian wore the first expression I had ever seen him not choose. The smile stayed on his mouth like a light left on in an empty house.
Ava, darling, you're exhausted. We've asked too much of you this week.
I'm not tired, Julian. I've never seen anything so clearly in my life. And I walked, unhurried, spine straight, past the cake with my name on it, and I did not look back. In my first life, I spent 5 years looking back. I was done. The family convened where the family always bleeds, the library. My father raged about the guests, the senators, the press. They had banked on tears. I brought bookkeeping.
Julian Marsh is the finest young man to come near this family in a decade.
Julian Marsh is a well-made door, Papa, and none of us has ever once looked behind it. Celeste chose her moment. Poor Julian, so devastated, pearls tightening at her throat. I observed, mildly, that she'd been with him within 20 minutes of my exit. That was quick. The pause before her answer lasted a quarter second too long. I let it lie there, faceless, ticking. When the others had gone, my grandmother, who had sat through the entire storm without 1 word, studied me from her armchair like a jeweler finding a flaw she rather liked. And the corner of her mouth almost smiled. It was the warmest thing that had happened to me in 2 lifetimes. Refusing Julian was only the tourniquet. I had turned a patient predator into a provoked one. I needed a piece they could not take. The one-man Julian could never outmuscle, outspend, or outcharm. Dominic Kane. In 5 future years, I never once heard of him losing. So I traded cream silk for a dark coat, slipped down the back stairs past my own name rolled up in canvas on the terrace, and gave a midnight driver the one address in this city that frightens people in daylight. Here is the strange thing, the thing I filed away and shouldn't have. I was expected. No call, no question. The concierge simply opened the private elevator, as though my arrival were on a schedule someone had forgotten to show me. He stood at the window with his back to me and let me cross half of that enormous silence before he turned. Storm blue eyes, a scar through one eyebrow, a vintage silver watch that snagged my eye for half a beat, almost familiar, before I let it go. There would be time, I thought, to wonder about everything. I was wrong about how much. I'm offering you a contract marriage, Mr. Kane. Fixed term, on paper only. My 19% of Sinclair votes with you. The Grand's name stands beside your tower. In exchange, your name. Because the people preparing to take everything from my family are patient, and they are good. And there is exactly one man in this city they will not move against. I've done the arithmetic. It's you. He said nothing for so long I could hear my own pulse. Then he reached out, without looking down, and moved a single piece, knight to the center. The losing white position quietly stopped losing.
Name your terms.
Across the city, in an apartment full of mirrors, my ex-fiancé was learning what his face looked like with the charm off. My sister let herself in with a key she should not have had, and the snakes drank to their own patience.
To the family. She has 3 months of luck, at most.
3 months. I'd have taken that bet. But here is what I couldn't see that night. High above the city, long after I had gone, Dominic Kane opened a drawer. Inside lay a photograph, face down, its edges worn soft, placed there not that night, not that week, years before I ever rang from the lobby. He looked at it a long time. He did not turn it over. He closed the drawer. I had walked out of that tower believing I was the only person alive who remembered the future. The future, as it turned out, had other alumni. End of Act 1 continues in Script Act 2. MD, SCN 201. Somewhere across the city, the man I had jilted was toasting my downfall, and a drawer in Kane Tower held a photograph turned face down. I knew about the first. The second I would learn to fear. That morning, all I had was the contract. 12 clauses, 2 years, separate rooms, separate floors. And Clause 11, neither party shall ask questions about the other's past. I read that one 3 times. In my first life, every document put in front of me was a trap dressed as a gift. He hadn't spoken since I sat down. Then he crossed the room, took the pen, and wrote a 13th clause.
Clause 13. Either party may tear this up, at any time, for any reason, without penalty.
That defeats the purpose of a contract.
It defeats the purpose of a cage. Sign it or don't.
A trap I would have understood. A door left deliberately unlocked unsettled me more. I signed anyway. The scratch of the nib was the loudest sound in the room.
The wedding, small or loud.
Loud. I want the whole city to choke on it. The city choked beautifully. Heiress marries the wolf, 10 days after jilting the golden boy. The wedding of the decade lasted 11 minutes, cold as the marble it stood on. No banners, no orchestra, no father. His absence sat in the front row, like a guest of honor. I wore my mother's locket outside the collar, where the cameras couldn't miss it. She attended the only way she could, and then, from the back of the hall, a jade cane on marble. Gran, 82, the only Sinclair who came. She looked my new husband up and down like an empress inspecting a border king.
Well, you're tall enough.
I try.
Your father is sulking in his library like a boy who lost a bet. He'll come around, or he won't, and either way the sun will insist on rising.
2 taps of the cane, approval rendered in stone, and she filled my father's empty seat completely. On the steps, my hand rested on his arm, for the photographers. Halfway down, I realized I'd stopped noticing it was there. Marriage, week 1. 2 strangers, 1 kitchen, 20 feet of marble. But every morning the chessboard had changed. 1 move, per person, per day. Neither of us ever mentioned it. Neither of us ever missed. The most honest conversation I'd had in years, conducted entirely in wood. One night I found him asleep in his study, a silver watch ticking face up on the desk. I hunted the trap, the angle, the lie, and found nothing to file. That should have been a comfort. It wasn't. In my room, I opened my ledger, the future, in my own small hand. First entry, underlined twice, the audit rumor, 2 days out. Come on then, let's begin. It arrived on schedule at 9:47. Audit irregularities, alleged by a blog nobody respects and everybody reads. By mid-morning, the stock was falling like weather. In my first life, I spent this day crying in a bathroom until Julian rode in at 6 with a white knight purchase and a statesman's smile. The rumor was his, the rescue was the sale, the commission was my trust. This life, I gave Theo one word. We took the bottom of the dip across 3 brokers. Then I walked unannounced into the emergency board meeting and laid one folder on the obsidian table under my mother's portrait. A spotless, independent audit, commissioned 9 days earlier. The rumor was dead before lunch. My father stared at this stranger with his daughter's face and nodded. Once. Not trust yet, but no longer fury. Julian arrived at 6 with his heroics pre-scripted and found the fire out, the house repainted, the role already played. In my first life, I mistook patience for love. In this one, I was learning to enjoy arithmetic. Victory lasted 2 days, until Theo brought me the trade reports, 1 page flagged yellow.
Our buy is hit at 10:15, but there's a block purchase in the log at 9:35, 12 minutes before the story even existed. Somebody bought the bottom of a dip that hadn't happened yet.
K Holdings Limited, a shell inside a shell. My ledger of the remembered future had nothing at 9:35 on that date, noise, or a page from someone else's ledger.
For what it's worth, whoever they are, they trade like you.
It landed like a dropped glass. That evening, my chessboard move took twice as long to choose. The ledger's next entry wasn't written in money. 1 month after the engagement party, my grandmother falls on the east staircase. Hip, pneumonia, wheelchair, ruled an accident. In my first life, I believed it. In my first life, I believed everything, so I rewrote the stairs. A new runner that gripped. The planter moved for the light, and 2 maids polishing brass at the remembered hour, witnesses where the first life had none. On the 4th morning, a groundsman I didn't recognize waited at the foot of the stairs, a wax bar palmed in his glove, invisible, lethal to an 82-year-old hip. He waited for the stairs to empty. They didn't. She takes that staircase at 9. You've missed her by an hour. Celeste didn't tell you she's an early riser? What followed, in a pantry with the door shut, wasn't violence. It was arithmetic. What Celeste was paying him against what a witness with immunity is worth. You have 2 employers now. One of them knows your name. The other one knows your future. He nodded. They always nod. Then, tea in the rose garden, my grandmother, unfallen, unbroken, watching me over the rim of her cup.
The east stairs have a new runner. The planters moved, and Marta tells me you asked which mornings I take my walk. In my day, when a girl learned things like that, she was either planning an inheritance or preventing one.
Drink your tea, Gran.
You walk like a soldier now, child. Whose war?
Beyond the roses, the greenhouse burned white in the sun. The place where the future kept my body. Ours. She didn't understand, and she understood completely. She closed her hand over mine and asked nothing else. It was the closest I came, in either life, to telling someone. Julian didn't rage twice. That's what made him dangerous. He went on television carefully wounded, wishing me every happiness, worrying about the influences around me now. He never spoke the name Kane. It hung over every sentence like smoke. And he poured brandy for my father by the library fire, filling the chair I'd left, his signet ring turning slowly in the light. I didn't know yet what that ring was for. Celeste opened the other front, a rival rooftop, cigar smoke, Marcus Vane. She sold him our lease calendar and 2 reachable directors.
I'm not the princess. I'm the sister. What I want is for the princess to be busy.
That night I wrote something new in the ledger, not a memory, a projection. And for the first time, my map of the future looked more like a hypothesis. The new move arrived on a Tuesday, in a language I speak fluently, paper. A hostile bid on the land lease beneath the Sinclair Grand, timed to a window only an insider could have known. which is how my husband and I came to sit side by side at the obsidian table for the first time. I took the lease apart clause by clause. I knew the 40-year-old document better than the lawyers who drafted the attack, and every time I paused, he spoke, 4 times, never more than 2 sentences, each one a door slamming, parcels he owned, financing he named, bank, tranche, and covenant, a counter motion already seconded, and last, gazing mildly down the table.
Mr. Vane can of course proceed. Some men buy hotels, some men buy lawsuits. I'd want to know which I was before I signed.
The bid didn't lose a vote. It simply stopped being real, the way weather changes. And the room noticed the mechanism, not the victory. I set up, he struck, he opened a line. I was already down it. Once, the lease exhibit slid into my reaching hand before I asked, neither of us looking, and half the table saw it. The whisper was born in the minutes. The contract marriage isn't a contract. In the elevator afterward, I studied his reflection in the brass. AVA, you'd already read the lease, before today, before the bid. Dominic, yes. AVA, why?
Because it's where they were always going to aim.
The doors opened on flashbulbs before I could ask the question underneath the question. Always. 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. The K Holdings page was clipped into my ledger like a foreign object. I came down barefoot and found the kitchen light on. He just stood at the window, with the stillness of long practice at not sleeping. There were already 2 cups on the counter. And then, without a word, without looking at me, he built my coffee. Half a spoon of sugar, dissolved in the espresso before the milk. The milk stopped an inch short. The handle turned to my left hand, because I drink left-handed at night and right-handed in boardrooms. I had never told a living soul, because who would ever watch closely enough? He said it in front of me. That's how I take it. Dominic, is it? AVA, I've never made coffee in front of you.
Lucky guess.
The Ava of the boardroom would have pushed. But it was 2 in the morning. The coffee was warm, and it was, right, correct, in a way nothing had been since I woke up with my old life ahead of me. So we drank facing the city and said nothing. Upstairs, I wrote 3 words in the ledger's margin, small, and didn't cross them out. Who else remembers? The Sinclair Grand's centenary. White roses, the chandelier at full blaze, and 1,000 real candles. The family opened this hotel by candlelight and never once broke the tradition. 300 guests, all our snakes among them, smiling. I wore emerald silk and my mother's locket, and my father faltered mid-sentence when he saw me, and inside my head, it was not a party, it was a date, the gala fire, the ledger's blackest early entry, except the ledger said the fire was not tonight. Wrong date, wrong event, wrong page. I had checked everything, and still I had fire crews parked 2 streets away, because a woman who died in a greenhouse does not trust glass, or candles, or luck. Gran held court until 11, then went up to her suite, in the east wing. I danced with my husband because the room required it. Our first touch longer than a photograph, and somewhere in the turn.
You keep checking the west corridor.
AVA, old habit. Dominic, you've had the fire teams on Culver Street since Tuesday. He could not have known that. There was no way for him to know. His eyes held mine over the turn, and for one suspended, candlelit moment, I thought the conversation was finally about to happen, and then I smelled it. Underneath the beeswax and the roses and 300 perfumes, smoke. My eyes went, not west, where my ledger and my fire crews were pointed, but east, a thin gray ghost curling along the ceiling molding, delicate as a signature. The fire was early, the fire was moved, the timeline wasn't a recording, it was an opponent. It had seen my preparations and stepped around them, and Gran was in the east wing. His hand closed hard around my wrist, already moving, already turned east, like a man who had done this before. In my first life, I knew every date the future kept. That was the night I learned the future had started keeping mine. Smash, to black, too. The man who knew her coffee order. Narration. AVA, first person past tense, dialogue marked speaker, tone, For multi-voice TTS, scene refs match scenes act 3, MD. The smoke arrived before the alarm did. It came down the grand staircase like a gray tide, and for one long second 1,000 candles kept burning inside it. Then the bells found their voice, and 300 guests discovered together that they were wearing shoes they could not run in. I ran too. The wrong way.
Ma'am, the exits are behind you, ma'am.
My grandmother is in the East Wing. My ledger said the fire came in autumn. It was spring, and Gran was resting in the wing my perfect memory swore was safe. Behind me, cutting through the panic like a black keel, came my husband. Not calm, I realize now, but terrified the way soldiers are. Like a man who had done this before, and it had not ended well. The east stairwell was gone, a wall of heat. So I did the thing I could explain to no one. I opened a 1926 staff corridor hidden in a blank wall, known to me from inquest maps published after a fire that had not happened yet. This way. He followed without a single question. Remember that. His hand was already reaching past me, for a handle he should not have known was there. We found her upright in her chair, hands folded on the jade cane like a queen annoyed with her court.
Took you long enough.
Then she coughed, and the cough was what frightened everyone. Dominic carried her, 82 years of Sinclair steel over his shoulder, and the last 10 meters we did blind, on held breath, his free hand on my shoulder the whole way, not guiding me, counting me. Then night air, rain-wet gravel. My father's hotel burning against the sky, while 300 guests watched from the lawns like an audience at the end of the world. And off to the side, where no camera could see, Dominic looked down at his own hands. They shook, exactly once. Then his fists closed, and it stopped. A tremor from a man who does not tremble. I filed it away, not knowing I was collecting evidence for a trial my heart had already scheduled. Dawn found the East Wing, a black skeleton dripping gray water.
This wasn't a candle, Miss Sinclair. Burn pools along the baseboards. Low, greedy. Someone fed it.
Arson, I had known it would be. I had been ready for this fire for months, crews pre-positioned, exits mapped, for the wrong date. Theo found the reason in the insurance filings. Halcyon Reserve, the shell company, had changed insurers 11 weeks ago, doubled the East Wing coverage, moved the date forward. They moved the fire because I moved everything else. My one weapon was a perfect memory of 5 years of future, and every victory I took quietly redrew the map. I had been fighting with tomorrow's newspaper, and tomorrow had started printing new editions. In my first life, I knew nothing and lost everything. In this one, I knew everything, and I could feel it going, hour by hour, like heat from a body. So I opened the ledger, drew a line through the fire entry, and wrote beneath it, "They adapt, so do I." The money led us into the dark. Theo traced Halcyon Reserve up through its shells to a registered agent sharing a mailing address with the law firm of Julian Marsh's family estate. Not proof, the silhouette of proof. Our flipped informant passed us a work order, maintenance access to the East Wing 9 days before the gala, signed by a name on no staff roster. The fire had a key. Julian stood in front of the ruin he had paid for and called it a wound to the whole city. The city wept with him. Then the quietest thing of all, Mrs. Brandt, the housekeeper, dusted the library and left one torn page inside the book I had left open. Deliveries signed for by Celeste, the Belgian mineral water my father drinks, beginning 14 months ago. Nothing on that page was illegal. But my first life remembered what came later, a healthy man's heart failing by inches. My ledger said that was 5 months away. It had been wrong before. My father summoned a family dinner, olive branch or examination, I never decided which. Candles, too much table, my mother's portrait presiding. Halfway through, he told a story.
30 years ago, a man pulled me out of the harbor. My car went off the key road in the ice, and a stranger went into 3 meters of black water after me. Wouldn't give his name, wouldn't take money, so I found where he lived, and I sent him the only thing I owned that meant anything, My father's watch. Silver, engraved. He never wrote back. I always wondered what became of it.
I missed it. I was watching my father, and I missed the man beside me quietly turning his silver watch face inward, the engraved case back against his pulse. He refilled Gran's water glass. Afterward, my father stood beneath my mother's portrait, and for one unguarded minute, we were just two people she had left behind.
She never trusted easily. I thought it was coldness. It took me 30 years to understand it was sight. You have it, Ava. Whatever you're seeing, whatever has made you like this, I find I am more afraid of not believing you than of believing you.
It wasn't surrender. My father would waver again, but it was a door left unlocked, and I had buried this man once with everything unsaid. So I looked at the portrait and kept my face. The old annex roof, one umbrella. The estate and the tower both had too many ears. I didn't know, couldn't know, what that rooftop had once cost him. He came anyway, no umbrella of his own. He never intended to stay dry. For a long time, the only conversation was the rain. Then I gave myself 60 seconds with the walls down. No more. Clause 13. Either party may tear it up. When the war ends, when they're finished, all of them, you'll be free of this, of me. I intend to honor that. You didn't sign on for whatever this is becoming. I had rehearsed it as generosity. It came out as a question. Dominic said nothing. He stepped out from under the umbrella, into the rain. 2 steps, 3, and stopped, on my windward side, between me and the weather, hands in his pockets, water running down the scar through his eyebrow. In my first life, love was a speech in front of 300 guests. In this one, it was a man standing in the rain, saying nothing at all. I knew which one I believed. That was the trouble. I came home past midnight, and the chessboard stopped me at the door. Black had played a defense. Not a defense, my defense. The cramped, patient, counterpunching setup I invented at 19, with the wrong-looking knight and the trap that only springs on the greedy. I had shown it to no one in this life, no one. He was at the window with a glass he wasn't drinking, shirt sleeves, the first time I ever saw him without armor. Where did you learn that?
From someone I lost.
He set down the glass and walked past me, close enough that I could smell the rain still in his hair, and was gone. I stood alone with the board and touched my own knight, and the arithmetic I had been refusing for months, finally, quietly, began. The watch, silver, engraved, turned face in at my father's story. The trade, placed 40 minutes before mine, account name K Holdings, K. The coffee, black, 1 sugar, orange peel, my mother's absurd order, told to no one in this life. Lucky guess. The corridor, his hand reaching past me for a handle no living map showed. He knew my coffee order. He knew the corridor. He knew my defense, played by a girl in a library 20 years ago. My husband of convenience, the stranger I chose because he owed nothing to anyone, knew things he could not know, unless... The phone rang at 4 in the morning. Theo's voice was wrong.
Ava, you need to see the morning papers before the morning does.
Julian had finally understood he could not beat me on the board, so he flipped the table. 6 a.m., 3 tabloids, every feed in the city. The Sinclair heiress's other man. Photographs, grainy, nocturnal, expensively doctored, of me in a parked car with a man I had never met. Vane's own fixer, lent for the job. Built by people who understood the truth is irrelevant if the picture is good. The pictures were very good.
I won't speak ill of Ava. Whatever she's become, I loved her once.
The city drank it, brokers murmured. My staff stopped meeting my eyes. 12 directors who had applauded me 3 weeks earlier studied their hands and used the words liability and morals clause. But the cut that bled was the rose garden.
Tell me who you are fighting, child, all of it, because I am too old to defend a granddaughter I am not allowed to know.
I stood there cornered for the first time in this life. Not by enemies, by love. Every true answer would sound like madness. Every counterattack would expose evidence I had no lawful way of owning. One warhead was still incoming. The scandal would splash onto Dominic, his lenders, his board. His name. Clause 13 sat in a drawer like a loaded thing, and any sane man would use it. He would hear it from me, tonight, face to face. I told myself I was going to warn him. 5 years of perfect hindsight, and I could still lie to myself in the present tense. The penthouse was dark. His study door, always closed, stood ajar, a blade of lamplight across the floor. The housekeeper had said the garage. 5 minutes, 10. I should have waited by the chessboard. But a woman who has been murdered once does not knock. Behind the wall of books, the safe stood open, interrupted. A thing he would never leave, except even careful men get careless once. Inside there was no money, no contracts. 3 objects, arranged with the terrible neatness of a reliquary. A photograph. A funeral, shot from the back of a chapel. White lilies. A closed casket. My face on the easel beside it. The date in the corner, 5 years from now. A day that hasn't happened. A day that did. A chain. Thin. Gold. The twin of the one at my throat, link for link, except 3 links were fused into a melted blister. I know what melts a locket chain and leaves it worth keeping. I was wearing it when I learned. And a hospital band. Plastic. Scissored open. Cut from a wrist. My name in dot matrix letters, and after my name, 3 more. DOA. The floor changed its sound. I turned. Dominic stood in the doorway, coat on, rein on his shoulders, keys still in his hand, and for the first time since I had known him, in either life, his face was not composed. It was not anything. I did not speak. He did not speak. In my first life, I died without ever knowing who ran toward the fire. In this one, I stood holding the proof, and the proof was my own funeral, and the only man who could explain it stood in the doorway, not breathing, waiting to see which of us would break the world first. At end of Act 3, continues Act 4, SCN 401, The Confession. The safe was open. In my hands, a photograph of my own funeral, dated 5 years from now, a hospital band with my name, and the twin of my mother's chain, melted at one edge, the way gold melts when it goes through fire with you. He didn't reach for an excuse. In 2 lifetimes of watching men reach for excuses, that was the first thing that undid me.
Ask. You've earned every question in the world. Ask.
The coffee. That first night in the kitchen, you said lucky guess.
1,400 mornings. That's how many times I watched you order it. Half of them from across a room you never knew I was in.
Say it plainly, Dominic. Say what these are.
They're what I was holding the night I died.
The color drained out of the room like water out of a wound, and my husband told me his first life.
It started with your father. A coast road, a crashed car, sleet. I pulled him out. He pressed his watch into my hands and never got my name.
The watch. Engraved RS. I had slept 20 feet from it for a year.
After that I went where the Sinclairs went. Openings, charity dinners, and one night, across your lobby, under the chandelier, I saw you, 22, laughing at something your grandmother had said. I watched you for 6 years, from the back rows of your own life. I told myself a man like me doesn't cross that floor. Then Julian crossed it instead. You want to know what cowardice looks like. It looks like patience. It looks like telling yourself there'll be a better moment. For 6 years, until the moments run out.
He read the engagement in the papers, coffee going cold, watched my wedding from a parked car, watched me spend myself down to nothing on a man who did not exist, and said nothing.
At your father's funeral, I finally decided. That night, when the vultures went home, I'd drive to the estate and say it, whatever it cost. I arrived a few minutes after 4 in the morning. I arrived to firelight.
Down the gravel path, a man in a camel coat walked away without hurrying, checked his watch, and a stranger ran toward the flames, coat gone, the second figure I saw through the glass the night I died and never knew.
I couldn't break it. Old estate glass. My hands, my shoulder, an iron urn. It starred, it held. You'd stopped beating the door by then. You slid down the glass, and I went down with you. You put your palm flat against the pane.
I remembered. God help me, a shape in the dark, and gratitude that anyone had come at all.
You died at 4:12. I was holding your hand through the glass.
He said it the way facts are said. That was worse than any scream.
At dawn, they pulled me off the window. Your chain had fused to the frame. I pried it free, kept the band from the coroner's envelope, stood at the back of your funeral.
Then 2 years. He took Julian apart with the patience of a man who had nothing left to be patient for. The forged will, exposed clause by clause. Halcyon reserve dragged into daylight. It worked. That was the bitter part.
I won. 2 years too late, I won everything except the only thing.
He died in the annex fire with the photograph, the chain, and the band in his coat. He didn't describe it. He only said,
I didn't run very hard. There was no one left to run for. Then I woke up. Sunlight. My old ceiling. 5 years back, the same morning you did. And these were in my hand. I never asked why. I decided they were a receipt.
You knew. From the first night, the chessboard, the contract. Why didn't you say,
Because the first life happened to you. Your father decided. Julian decided. Even the people who loved you decided. You came back owning your own life for the first time. You deserved a life where nobody chose for you, not even me. That's why Clause 13 exists. I wrote you a door, Ava. I always meant to let you use it.
the longest silence of my 2 lives? I didn't cry, and when I moved, it wasn't toward him. I walked past him, to the board by the window, the one our marriage began on, where he'd been playing a dead woman's favorite defense. I cleared it and set every pawn on its home square, turned it a quarter turn so neither of us owned the white. New game. Both players awake. His hand came to rest an inch from mine, not touching. After 2 lifetimes, an inch was enough, and Dominic Kane, in private, where only I could spend it, smiled. Narration. In my first life, I was mourned by a stranger. In this one, I found out his name. Dawn. 2 ledgers of the future on one black table. Mine held the crime, 5 years of dates, dips, fires, falls. His held what I never saw. The 2 years after, when the machine confessed to him, I knew the war as its victim. He knew it as its coroner.
I'm not going to ask. The answer will keep me up at night.
First strike, the affair Julian invented for me. Dominic slid 1 folder across the table, the fixer's payment trail, ending in an account Julian's own ringed hand had signed. Theo fired it through 3 financial desks at dawn. By evening, the city that had turned on me wheeled and took its first real bite of Julian Marsh.
Whoever is running your war now, child, keep 'em.
But wounded snakes don't retreat. They strike short.
They're ahead of us, everywhere.
Then we stop playing where they can see the board. How is her father's heart?
The ring. In my first life, the poison began at month 8. We were at month 5. So at the founder's dinner, 200 guests, my father asking me to stand beside him for the toast. I wore black now, red lips, tracked the camel coat by reflex, and told myself, there is time.
Let me. He's my father too, in everything but paper.
His hand passed over the glass in the time it took the flash to fire. I saw it half a second too late, from 30 feet, through silk and shoulders.
To my daughter, who was right when I was...
A doctor.
My father folded like a coat dropped from a hook, and 200 people watched. Celeste's cry was pitched to carry. Julian was first to his side, and every camera agreed on the story it was watching. I reached my father's hand, and for 1 private frame, Julian let me see it. The flat, dead calm from the greenhouse. Your move cost him this. Then the mask came back. In my first life, they poisoned him over years and called it a tired heart. This time, I had made them impatient. I was about to learn what impatience does. Green light. My father on the far side of a window, and my palm flat against the glass. I knew this position. I had died in it. Dominic laid his coat over my shoulders and said nothing. He has never once lied to me. Narration, Celeste's tears photographed beautifully. She embraced me for the cameras and whispered nothing at all. The embrace was the threat. Then the trap closed in 3 quiet moves. The tea tin I'd given my father, the one warm act of this life, carried out in an evidence bag, the compound and its leaves. A nurse, frightened and very well paid, remembering me alone with his things, and at 12:04 a.m., Julian's lawyers stamped 2 filings, guardianship of my father, emergency control of the board. By morning, I was the daughter who broke the engagement, married the rival, and poisoned the tea she gave with her own hands. The first life took 5 years to steal my name. This one tried it in a night. At 7 in the morning, Detective Inez Salazar walked in. Trench coat, tight ponytail, a toothpick that moved when she thought. She watched Celeste's choker instead of her tears. She let Julian charm her for 11 minutes, then stopped him with one question about insurance. She kept me for last.
Everything says you did it. Tea's yours. Access is yours. Motive, half the city thinks so. That's what bothers me. 20 years, I never saw everything point the same way, unless somebody drew the arrows.
And if I told you who drew them?
I'd ignore you. I don't take arrows from suspects either. Don't leave town, Mrs. Kane. Interesting husband you have. Man looks at you like he's seen you die.
A throwaway line. It went through us both like a blade. She filed the flinch. The worst discovery of this life. The guardianship filing existed in neither of our memories. The timeline had left its rails. 2 prophets out of prophecy.
Contest at dawn, and we show everything months early, half ripe, in their forum. Don't, and by 9 a.m. Julian holds the proxy, the board, the company, and you're indicted by lunch.
Dominic set a black case on the table like something radioactive. His first life file. Every crime, every date, including the ones that hadn't happened yet. Unusable in any court. Fatal if leaked, to Julian and to us.
We burn it into the wires tonight. Julian doesn't survive the week. Neither do we, probably. Not as people anyone believes. I've already died for you once. The sequel doesn't frighten me.
No. Both doors were theirs. So I built a third. I laid my finger on one line of his ledger, a name I never knew while I was alive. Halcyon Reserve had a second beneficiary, Julian's mistress, the real one. 5 years of payments, beginning before Celeste, before everything she'd lied for. And Celeste doesn't know.
You're not gonna fight the snakes. You're gonna introduce them.
The leak was small and clean. Celeste's own staircase man, mine since the day I flipped him, handed her one photocopied page a nervous bank clerk might have sold. 2 beneficiary lines, the shell she knew, and an account feeding a lilac-shuttered apartment, 5 years deep. Every line true. I forged nothing. I planted only the truth, paid for at the price of a first life. Narration. In the mirror apartment, 9 reflections of Celeste read the page twice and folded it once. Her free hand rose to the pearl choker and tightened it.
You waited up.
Of course I did.
I didn't set a trap for them. I just told one snake the truth about the other and stepped back to a safe distance, below her window at 2 in the morning. Salazar, in a parked car, finding her own arrows. The next night, 11:40. The boardroom lit like a courtroom for a hanging. 12 directors who wouldn't meet each other's eyes, and my mother's portrait watching the empty doorway. At 11:52, Julian took my father's chair, the signet ring tapping once on the obsidian. Celeste at his right hand, grieving flawlessly, one hand rising to her throat.
In the absence of any other voice for this family.
I came late. Late as a verdict. Black tailoring, red lips, my mother's locket at my throat, and her eyes at my back. No lawyers, no haste, one thin folder. I took the seat beneath the portrait, laid the folder on the black stone without opening it, and folded my hands. Narration. In my first life I begged at this table. This time I brought the menu. Midnight. 12 directors dragged from their beds, and a man at the head of my family's table holding a forged future like a trophy he hadn't won yet.
What this board needs, what Richard would want, is a steady hand for the family's stability in this terrible hour.
In my first life, I begged at this table. This time I brought the menu. Finish your sentence. You were telling the board about stability. He offered me a chair. I let him watch me not take it. For the next 6 minutes, only 2 people in that room stood. A duel. I had spent 2 lifetimes loading. I opened the folder and dealt the first card down the stone. The first door, the audit rumor, the crisis he once solved so heroically, traced backward through 3 hired mouths to a retainer his own lawyers had registered.
Rumor and coincidence, gentlemen. Grief does strange arithmetic.
The man on his left had already stopped looking at him. The second door. Theo stood up, and his voice cracked once, and then it found iron.
I was paid in cash to loosen the stair runner on the east staircase of the Sinclair estate. I was given the hour Mrs. Eleanor Sinclair takes her morning walk. Sworn, signed, witnessed. The phone records name the intermediary. The intermediary's records name Miss Celeste Sinclair.
Halfway down the table, a hand drifted to a pearl choker and tightened it. I didn't need to look. I'd been watching that tell since before she knew she had it. The third door was one small page in a housekeeper's careful hand. 30 years of deliveries, signed and logged. One wine merchant that never existed. Addressed to Mr. Marsh. Received, always, by Miss Celeste.
A grocery list. She's brought you a grocery list.
No one thinks to forge the domestic. That's why it kills. Click.
No pre-cut slides. Watch me do it live. Shell to holding trust. Halcyon Reserve. The entity that collected the fire insurance. The entity that changed insurers 3 weeks before the fire moved. Beneficiary certificate resolving. Now.
Letter by letter, on the screen that had shown a decade of his triumphs. Julian Adair Marsh. The room made a sound like air leaving a sealed door. 4 doors. And for one frame, the smile was simply gone, and I was looking at the face from the greenhouse.
None of this is a court. This is a boardroom. Hand your little folder to the detective in the corner and spend 3 years in litigation. Meanwhile, the company votes at 9 and the company votes with me. Notarized.
There is a moment in every game when your opponent reaches for the piece he has already lost. You must let his fingers touch it. Notarized. By Edward Fall. Commission number on the seal. Theo.
I have never seen that document before tonight. The seal is mine, the log is not. 3 weeks ago, a man offered me a great deal of money to predate an entry. I refused, and I was frightened enough afterward to photograph my register, every night since.
Julian played the proxy. I played the notary, who never notarized it. The 5th door didn't click. It slammed, and the proxy lay on the stone between us for what it was, a confession with a seal on it. In the corner, Detective Salazar took out a notebook.
Richard signed it. He'll confirm it when he wakes.
He will wake. Count on it. I still had one sleeve in the folder, red tabbed. The ring, the brandy, the bought nurse, the kill shot. I looked at it. I looked at him, and I closed the folder. I could have ended him myself. But I had learned something in 2 lifetimes about snakes. You don't have to cut off the head. You only have to make the nest too small for 2. Days ago, I had whispered one true sentence into the right ear. Halcyon Reserve has a second beneficiary, and she is not his wife's sister.
Everything I have done, everything I have done for this family.
For the family. Tell them about the family, Julian. Tell them about the flat on Copeland Row. 7 years I carried your knives and washed the handles. I forged the smiles. I timed the accidents. I aged your money for you, and you sewed her name into the lining of our escape. So take what you're owed. The accounts, I know them. I fed them. The ring. Open the ring, detective. There's a compartment under the crest. I watched him fill it. The brandy, every evening, patient as a calendar. He called it helping Richard toward the inevitable. He practiced saying, heart trouble runs in the family, in the mirror, his mirrors. I stood behind him and held his coat. I'm done holding it.
She hired the stairman. She chose the compound.
Yes, and they'll believe me, darling. I've had 20 years of practice being believed.
I never said another word at that table. That was the point. I stood at the foot of the black lake, folder closed, and my mother's portrait and I watched the end together.
Mr. Marsh, Miss Sinclair, downstairs, please, both of you.
The lobby of the Sinclair Grand at 1 a.m. White marble, emerald velvet, the chandelier like falling water, holding its breath over everything my family ever built. They walked them out across the name, Sinclair, in brass, in the threshold, so that both of them had to cross it on their way out of it forever. Celeste went quietly, which was somehow worse than screaming. She didn't look at me. She looked up, one long glance at all that frozen falling light, and then the doors took her. Julian stopped at the exact center of the marble. Under the brightest light in the city, with nothing left to sell it with, the charm finally cracked, and there it was, the face that checked a watch while I burned.
You were never this clever.
You never met me. I didn't watch him leave. I'd already seen it. 5 years from now, in reverse, through glass and fire. We were even. By dawn, the news cycle finished what the boardroom began. Marcus Vane taken off his own rooftop before his coffee cooled. The empire of snakes, unwound in a single morning. Celeste traded. Full testimony for a smaller cell and a shorter horizon. But the law's sentence was not the sentence. Days later, my grandmother arrived late, because arriving late is a family art and did not sit.
They tell me you'll trade your way down to a few soft years. Good, take 'em. I know what a cage does to a clever animal, and I would not wish it longer on anyone who ever ate at my table. But hear the rest. You came to us at 7 years old with a cardboard suitcase, and this family gave you its name, and you spent 20 years sharpening it into a key for other people's doors, so the name comes back. When you walk out of whatever room they keep you in, you will walk out as whoever you were before we found you, and Sinclair will be a word you read on other people's buildings. Your sister asked me to make it quick. That mercy is from her. The rest is from me.
The same sound that once approved my cold wedding, now closing a bloodline. My father woke. In my first life, the doctors named the compound at his autopsy. In this one, 2 remembered lifetimes named it in time. And then came the scene the first life never allowed. The library, the green lamps, my mother's portrait over the fire.
I keep trying to find the moment I began believing them instead of you. I've gone through the years like ledgers, and there's no entry. There was no moment. It was 1,000 small conveniences, and I called the ease wisdom because I was its beneficiary. I chose the comfortable lie over my own child. I am sorry. Not for what they did, for what I made easy.
You're saying it. She never got to hear anyone say it. I did. That's the difference between her life and mine. In my first life, my father died believing a forgery. In this one, he lived to say the truest thing I ever heard him say. Dawn found us where the war began. 1 long table, 1 chessboard, 2 coffees, both made correctly. Nobody had ever mentioned learning. That is what home is. The board sat at endgame, and I was 2 moves from winning. I forfeit. Turns out I don't want to beat you. And then, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he smiled. All the way. The scar lifted with it. The storm blue eyes gave up their weather.
Then the game's over.
No, just the war. He stood my king back up, not to resume, to keep, beside my queen. 2 pieces off duty forever. Our first wedding was a contract in a cold room. The second was honeystone and golden hour, 20 guests and not one of them there for the photograph, and my grandmother presiding by no legal authority whatsoever, and absolute force of personality.
I have married off fools and buried better. This is the first wedding in this family I have ever been certain of. Proceed.
For years I watched you from the back of rooms and called my cowardice patience. I was given a second chance I never believed I'd earned, so hear the whole of it. I have loved you in 2 lifetimes. In one of them, even death was not an excuse.
In my first life, I mistook patience for love, and it cost me everything, including the life itself. Then I woke up, and I did the arithmetic, and I chose the one man who never asked me to be less than what I knew. You held my hand through the glass when I died. Hold it now. I intend to make the second lifetime worth both of them.
Well then, kiss her.
A vow is just a sentence until you know the price of every word. We knew. We said it anyway. That is the whole secret. The honeymoon was somewhere warm. I won't tell you where. We'd earned one unmapped morning. The post found us anyway. Most of it was ordinary. One envelope wasn't. Cream, heavy, unsigned, no stamp, no postmark, which meant it had walked past hotel security that does not miss things. Inside, no letter, a single chess knight in a wood that matched nothing in our set, and one line in a hand neither of us had ever seen, the ink still fresh enough to shine.
Anything interesting?
Maybe. I set the knight on the desk facing the window, and I closed my hand around my mother's locket. Once, a message like that would have frightened me, but I had died once, married twice, and buried an empire of snakes before breakfast. Let them come. Every ending is someone else's morning.